You know, sometimes an event happens and the initial story, well, it just doesn't quite capture the whole picture. That's kind of what I felt looking into the missile strike in Sumy, Ukraine, back on April 13th, 2025.
Oh, absolutely. The first wave of reports and some of the initial messaging really framed it as a tragic, indiscriminate attack hitting civilians.
Right. But as we started to, dig a bit deeper, a more complex narrative began to take shape, didn't it?
It really did. Evidence started pointing towards a specific target, something quite different, a military award ceremony for the Ukrainian 117th Territorial Defense Brigade.
Okay, so that's a huge shift. Let's unpack how we got from point A to point B. What started to change that initial understanding?
Well, a key part was hearing directly from Ukrainian officials, not whispers, but public statements.
Like the mayor of Konotop, Artem Semenikin?
Exactly. He came out and stated that the Sumy Oblast governor, Volodymyr Artyuk, had actually organized this award ceremony for the 117th Brigade.
And the location was significant.
Very. Semenikin pointed out it was held right in the city center, and crucially, very near the site where the missile eventually struck.
So he wasn't just confirming it happened, he was connecting it directly to the strike location.
And more than that, he was highly critical. He called holding such a public event incredibly risky given the circumstances.
He didn't stop there, did he? I remember reading he demanded resignations.
He did. He called for the head of the military administration for the Sumy region, the OVA, and the head of the regional SBU, the security service, to step down. He essentially accused them of complicity.
Wow. Okay. So that's strong internal criticism right there.
Definitely. And it wasn't just him. Ukrainian MP Mariana Bezugla also weighed in.
On X, formerly Twitter. Right. What did she add?
She confirmed it, too, that the strike hit a military meeting, specifically this award ceremony held on Palm Sunday, of all days.
And she had concerns beyond just the event itself.
Yeah, she was quite forceful, urging commanders to stop holding these kinds of gatherings in civilian areas. But she also raised the possibility of an intelligence leak.
Suggesting the Russians might have known about the ceremony beforehand.
Precisely. She even referenced, kind of grimly, previous similar incidents, like a tragedy involving the 128th Brigade, and she seemed frustrated that no one was held accountable then.
And she directed comments towards the top.
She did. She directly addressed President Zelensky, questioning, whether these kinds of events and potential intelligence failures were just being accepted. It really signals some deep unease about operational security.
So the calls for accountability weren't isolated.
Not at all. Former MP Igor Mosychuk was also very vocal. He placed the blame squarely on the head of the Sumy military administration for, as he put it, endangering civilians.
Did he name names?
Yes, specifically naming head of the OVA Artyuk and also another MP, Ananchenko. He alleged they promoted this festive awarding for the 117th Brigade's anniversary.
And gathered civilians, even children there.
That was his allegation, yes. Which, if true, adds another deeply concerning layer to the whole situation. The idea of potentially drawing civilians into the target area.
Okay, so we have official confirmation of the event, criticism, calls for accountability. What about actual military casualties? Was it just the location or for a personnel hit?
We have definite confirmation of that, too. The Berdyshev District Military Administration issued a report.
And what did it say?
It reported the death of Colonel Yuri Yula in that specific Sumy missile strike on April 13th. He was a former deputy brigade commander of the 26th Artillery Brigade.
So a senior officer.
A senior officer, yes. They detailed his service, his awards, like the Order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, calling him a true combat commander. Their condolences went out to his family and his units. It leaves no doubt military personnel were casualties.
That really solidifies the idea that this wasn't just a random strike hitting near a ceremony, but that the ceremony itself or the people at it were likely the target.
It certainly points strongly in that direction, and it makes those questions about how the information got out even more pressing.
Which brings us back to Bezugla's point about leaks. Was there anything specific suggesting how that might have happened?
Well, there were reports that several military and government officials had actually published an image, like an advertisement, related to the founding anniversary of the 117th Brigade.
So potentially publicizing the event or the anniversary could have inadvertently signaled that something was happening.
That's the suggestion, yes. It fits with the concern about an intelligence leak. If you're advertising a brigade's anniversary, it's not a huge leap to assume there might be some kind of associated event, like an award ceremony.
It really underscores the dangers of Well, normal organizational publicity during an active war.
Absolutely. It's a constant tension. Though it's worth noting, even some Ukrainian telegram channels, while acknowledging the ceremony was likely the target, were still heavily emphasizing the civilian cost.
So accepting the target might have been military, but condemning the collateral damage.
Exactly. Highlighting the, unacceptable number of civilian deaths and injuries, regardless of the intended target. It's a tragic reality of strikes in populated areas.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the international reaction, specifically the U.S., because this strike seemed to expose some fault lines within the U.S. administration's approach.
It really did. First, you had the conflicting reports on casualties, Russia claiming they hit command staff, Ukraine reporting dozens of civilian deaths. That standard fog of war, perhaps?
But the U.S. internal response was the interesting part.
Yes. Reports emerged suggesting a real division within President Trump's administration about how to proceed with dialogue, or potential dialogue, with Russia.
Who were the key players in this disagreement?
On one side, you reportedly had advisors like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, pushing for a tougher stance.
Meaning what, exactly? Skeptical of Russia's intentions.
Deeply skeptical. They apparently didn't believe Moscow genuinely wanted peace and were strongly against Kyiv making territorial concessions. Their view seemed to be that Putin wasn't serious about ending hostilities.
Okay, and the other side, President Trump himself.
President Trump seemed to align more with his special representative Steve Whitkoff. Whitkoff, having met with Russian officials in Moscow, reportedly believed Putin did want peace.
So a fundamental disagreement on interpreting Putin's motives.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And Russia's actions weren't helping bridge that gap. They rejected Trump's ceasefire calls and kept advancing on the ground.
Which feeds the narrative that they're just delaying to gain leverage, right?
That's certainly how the skeptics would see it.
Mm-hmm.
It put President Trump in a tricky spot, wanting an end to the conflict, maybe partly for broader geopolitical reasons concerning Russia, but facing continued Russian military action.
And we didn't see those threatened sanctions on Russian oil materialize immediately.
Not immediately, no. Which could be seen as him trying to keep diplomatic channels open, maybe preserving leverage, as you say.
But even the tougher stance advisors still wanted the war to end.
Oh, yes. Reports suggested that ending the now 3-year conflict was a shared goal. The disagreement was really about the strategy, the tactics, and how much to trust Russian pronouncements.
How did President Trump himself react to the Sumy strike specifically?
Publicly, he called it a mistake. And interestingly, when asked about responsibility, he pointed towards former President Biden, saying he allowed the war to happen.
But his team had stronger words.
Yes, Kellogg called it an attack that crosses all red lines, and Rubio termed it horrific and tragic. Strong condemnations from his key foreign policy people.
And Trump also had some criticism for Putin directly, which you said was rare.
Relatively rare, yes. He reportedly said Putin, along with Biden and Zelensky, were mainly responsible for starting the war. But then, almost in the same breath, he expressed optimism about stopping the killing and getting very good offers soon.
It's a complex message, condemnation mixed with hope for imminent progress.
Very complex. And behind the scenes during White House talks about possible sanctions, Rubio and Kellogg were apparently urging caution about Putin's diplomatic signals, reinforcing that internal skepticism.
Meanwhile, President Zelensky had his own take.
He did. He stated pretty clearly that he believed Putin intended to continue the war, that Moscow wasn't afraid, and that fighting would go on without strong external pressure. A direct counterpoint to any idea Putin was ready for peace on acceptable terms.
How did the White House officially frame the Sumy strike in light of their peace efforts?
National Security Council spokesman Brian Hughes basically said the strike underscored the importance of President Trump's efforts to end the war, turning a negative event into a justification for their ongoing diplomacy.
And were those tougher sanctions still on the table?
According to former State Department official Daniel Fried, yes. He suggested State and Treasury were preparing options, perhaps feeling they now had political cover if Trump decided to act more forcefully.
But Congress wasn't necessarily waiting for the White House.
Apparently not. Senator Lindsey Graham and others introduced a bill targeting Russian energy exports designed to trigger if Moscow didn't make peace.
And they did this even though the White House asked them to wait.
That was the report, yes. An administration official confirmed they'd asked for a delay to maintain negotiating leverage. Graham, however, claimed significant Senate support for the measure.
It suggests Congress might be pushing for a harder line, regardless of the administration's preferred pace.
It certainly points to different pressures and perspectives between the branches. And you had figures like Thomas Graham, a former NSC official under George W. Bush, offering historical context.
Reminding everyone that trying to reset with Russia often doesn't end well.
Essentially, yes. He noted many presidents have tried and failed, and he believes Moscow's core goals in Ukraine haven't really changed since 2022 annexation and a pro-Russian government. A cautionary note for current efforts.
It puts President Trump's campaign claim of ending the war in 24 hours, later revised by Kellogg to 100 days, into perspective.
It does. And even Rubio recently said in Brussels that we'd know fairly soon, within weeks, not months, if Russia's serious. There's hope, but clearly a need for verification.
Okay, this brings us to maybe the most striking diplomatic move after Sumy, the U.S. decision regarding the G7.
Right. The U.S. decided not to join a planned G7 statement that would have condemned the strike.
Why not? What was the reasoning given?
The administration reportedly told allies it wouldn't sign on because it was working to preserve space for peace negotiations. A very deliberate choice.
And without the U.S., the statement didn't happen.
Correct. Canada, holding the G7 presidency, informed the others, the UK, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, that a statement wasn't possible without American support. It really shows the weight the U.S. carries in that group.
Do you know what the statement was going to say?
A draft seen by Bloomberg apparently intended to declare the Sumy attack as evidence that Russia was determined to keep fighting, undermining peace efforts.
So the U.S. explicitly avoided endorsing that interpretation.
It seems so. While other leaders like Macron and Starmer condemned the attack and urged a ceasefire, Macron even implying Moscow was ignoring Trump's diplomacy, the U.S. took a different path.
And again, Trump's own comment was more muted, terrible, and they made a mistake.
Yes. Meanwhile, back in Ukraine, the fallout continued locally.
With Mayor Semenikin blaming the regional head, Artyuk, for the ceremony.
Yes, although Artyuk acknowledged the ceremony happened, but denied organizing it. But the pressure was immense. Both Semenikin and MP Bezugla called for his resignation.
Bezugla used some strong language, didn't she?
She did, talking about leaks, needing to remove Soviet-era thinkers and idiots from the system. Very blunt.
And did this pressure have an effect?
It appears so. On April 15th, just 2 days after the strike, President Zelensky dismissed Artyuk. The government reportedly supported the decision.
So a direct consequence stemming from the controversy around that awards ceremony.
It seems directly linked, yes. And it's maybe worth remembering, this isn't the first time the U.S. has taken a slightly different line than some allies on formal statements about the war.
You mean like the UN resolution back in February?
Exactly. The U.S. didn't support a resolution marking the third anniversary because it specifically mentioned Russian aggression. The Kremlin, for its part, said it welcomed what it saw as a more balanced U.S. position.
So pulling it all together, the Sumy strike is far more than just one tragic incident. It's a lens into so many different aspects.
Absolutely. You have the contested facts on the ground. Was it purely civilian? Was it the ceremony, the conflicting casualty reports? Then the internal Ukrainian debate about risk, responsibility, and security.
And overlaid on all that, the major international dimension, particularly the clear divisions and strategic debates within the U.S. administration about how to deal with Russia and pursue peace.
It really forces you to grapple with some tough questions. Accountability for civilian deaths in wartime, especially when military activities happen nearby. The constant risk of intelligence failures.
And that fundamental challenge. How do you even try to negotiate an end to a conflict when attacks like this are still happening and there's such profound disagreement, even among allies, about the best path forward?
It leaves us with a lot to think about regarding the complexities of modern warfare, diplomacy, and the immense human cost involved.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.